Conference Committee reports on House files.
Conference Committee report on House File number 5237, an act relating to education. The report is addressed to the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File number 5237, report we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 4 of the 5 members on the part of the House and 4 of the 5 members on the part of the Senate. Joachim moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File number 5237 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good evening, members. Before you is, or good afternoon, before you is the Education Conference Committee report. The bill reflects the hard work of our Education Conference Committee. I would like to thank our conferees here in the House, Vice Chair Clardy, Representative Kresha, Representative Edelson, Representative Sensimura. I'd also like to thank the Senate conferees, Chair Kunish, Representative Gustafson, Representative McQuaid, Swedinsky, and Bolden, or Senator, I should say. I would also like to thank nonpartisan staff from the House and Senate, the Revisor's Office and the committee pages, and of course, our incredible House CAs and CLAs and researchers, also those that we got to know very well in the Senate. It took a village to put this conference committee report together, and that village got bigger as we pulled in the children and families provisions that had been negotiated in the Health and Human Services bill. Chair Pinto is going to go over those provisions that you will see in Articles 12 and 20 through 22. I will go over the provisions in Articles 1 through 11 that have changed since the Education Finance Bill moved off the House floor. Members, in Article 1 through 11, you will see almost the entire House bill that left our floor with some additions from the Senate that made it even better. The one House provision that was not included in Conference Committee was Representative Hicks' provision that she brought forward to take a comprehensive look at special education and how our schools are meeting the needs of our students. But Representative Hicks and a few of our other members will continue that work with stakeholders over the interim. There are a few updates to the provisions that were in the House bill. The updated READ Act language reflects the final agreement reached with Representative Edelson and Senator McQuaid, and more importantly, with all the education stakeholders and literacy groups. This includes sending about $31 million in teacher training stipends and a formula directly to school districts. This is the same approach we took with the $35 million we pulled forward from last year's curriculum funds that are now going directly to school districts. In a formula with both formulas with more flexibility on how school districts can spend that money. And members, there are runs on your desk, or will be on your desk, showing you each what your districts will get. You just have to add the 2 columns together. And these funds will go out without districts having to apply for them, which makes it even easier. Our paid student teaching pilot program funding was reduced a bit, lowering the average stipend amount to roughly just shy of $7,000 per student teacher, and we were able to add the prep teacher program at Augsburg College, increasing to the total of 8 campuses that will reach just shy of 50% of our student teachers. We shifted funds to increase the student attendance pilot program from $3.34 million to $4.687 million in one-time funding available for 3 years, and we added Rochester, Cook County, and Sauk Rapids Rice school districts. That brings our total to 12 school districts and just under $90,000 students statewide. This data should really be healthy and wealthy, with 10% of our student population being represented. The funds also provided increased administration funding for MDE for data analysis around attendance. The grant funding for Promise Fellows and Minnesota Youth Council is still in there, but it was just shaved a bit. PTEC actually did a little bit better with the grant funding modified, so their appropriation does not phase out entirely. There were technical amendments from MTE to the paraprofessional qualification language, as well as technical changes to MDE and DHS medical assistant third-party billing. MDE also suggested some technical amendments to the House OIG Office of Inspector General provisions, and I made sure Representative West knows that the Inspector General now has all the tools he needs to do his job. And Senate statewide health standards had some technical provisions. There was a stakeholder agreement to bring in modifying language, ensuring hourly school workers are paid on all unscheduled school closures to account for unique circumstances in fee-based school age care programs. but that's with money districts are already being paid and would retain if those people were working or not. There were a few Senate-only provisions that were included in the conference committee report. $1 million one-time funding to aspiring teachers of color scholarship program, which was also a House bill. $250,000 in one-time funding to the St. Cloud School District for an EMS facility suitable for coursework in EMS for high school students. That was also a House provision bill. $150,000 for a teacher paraprofessional compensation working group. $130,000 in one-time funding for a state school librarian, which the ongoing funding will come from the library aid that we had last year. $64,000 for a task force to look at permanent school funds. There is $40,000 in one-time funding from a Representative Newton bill, equivalent to funding school districts and charter schools to tribal schools. We recaptured $840,000 of unused funding from a 2024 appropriation that was in the tax bill. And the Senate had pulled over the education-related provisions in the public finance bill that the House carried in the House tax bill. So we all saw that in taxes. There were a few no-cost provisions that came into conference committee that were brought to our attention, agreed upon by both the House and the Senate and MDE. In last year's bill on the Indigenous Education for All language, there was a needs assessment that was done to see what the tribal leaders needed to help develop supplemental material. And we're just asking MDE to do an additional needs assessment. There were technical amendments from MDE to transfer some computer science, to do some computer science language changes, and then also to transfer some money. That was one of our bills. There was a repeal from an obsolete report that had been in the state government bill. And then members, there's also language in the state government bill that I know we all talked about when the education policy bill came off the floor. There had been concerns about school districts that lost their local paper and how much it would cost them to send out letters to everybody through the mail. And we had carved out those four school districts or 5 in the education policy bill. Well, we added some language that came from the state government bill, and this provision allows the school district, when their newspaper of record closes, that they can publish their proceedings on their school district website until about August 1st, 2026. Gives us time to really look at it. And then we also added in there that they must also send those the notices that they have to publish to their local public libraries in case people don't have access to the web. They'll be posted at the public library. So in closing, members, what you have before you is the entire House bill that passed off the House floor, minus one provision, a few monetary adjustments, and some minor technical corrections. This bill has also been enhanced by a handful of provisions that came over from our Senate colleagues. And with that, members, I will turn it over to Chair Pinto to go over the additions that came from the Children's and Families Committee.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So members, you'll recall a couple weeks ago, we passed House File 2476, which was the Children and Families Budget and Policy Bill. The Senate did not pass the companion to that bill. Senate's going to Senate. They sent their provisions over in a different way, and so this is why the provisions are coming back in this conference committee, because there wasn't a way to have it come back, unfortunately, by the bill. The good news, however, members, is that as good a bill has left the House chamber, it's even better coming back. So you'll recall that the bill that we sent over improved our child protection system, addressed food insecurity and homelessness, strengthened our child care and early learning system, and got our next new state agency, Department of Children, Youth, and Families, the strong foundation it's going to need. We were enhanced in every one of those areas. The bill now contains the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, sort of step 2 on that, authored by Representative Becker-Finn. A provision to prohibit discrimination against parents with disabilities from Representative Hicks. A provision to require an out-of-home placement plan when a child is being placed out of their home. We want to make sure that parents know what their rights are from Representative Hassan. And some money adjustments, a little bit less on homelessness, but a little bit more for food banks. There's some grants for child care facilities, making sure that, that our family child care providers and child care centers have what they need to meet licensing requirements and be strengthened there. That's a program that's very successful for a couple of years. We're going to be able to continue it. And then a number of policies advanced by our state agencies that were not in the bill as they left, but had received affirmative positive votes in committee, and were able to take those back. Members, that I think basically describes it. I will say that we had a very good bill, as I say, that left. It's even better coming back, and I'm so pleased that in doing that, we're able to have a broader approach of getting young people off to a great start and making sure that families and everybody in our state receives the support that they need to be successful, to receive the shelter, to receive the food, and to be in a place to thrive, because that benefits every one of us. So I think you're going to be very pleased by the bill, by the conference report. Look forward to its approval. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. The member from Pine, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And to Chair Pinto and Chair Joachim, I just want to thank you for the introduction of this bill. And I want to thank you for, overall, there's been a fairly transparent operation to this committee report. Some of them, or the committees, conference committee, not all of them have been run this smoothly. And I do want to thank you for that. And as has been brought up, there's a provision in this bill that, had left under health, and, the Senate did not have similar language or not in the same area. And, this is, come into the education bill now. And, unfortunately, we really don't feel like we had a whole lot of a voice. The health committee didn't meet, and it wasn't there, and it ended up not being there. In the end, it ended up being, the children and families portion ended up being put into this education bill. And it was the last conference committee meeting. There were several of these new proposals were put in. They were adopted. It was the children and families portion of that. And so now here we are today. I thank Chair Pinto. You were gracious and went through kind of a high overview with myself and a couple others of bringing those in, and thank you for that. And while it would have been nice to have an individual on the conference committee, I know that doesn't always work out. And I do appreciate the open conversation that we've had, and I've really grown to appreciate the Children and Families Committee. It was something that when I was first assigned to it, it wasn't one that I was asked to be on, but I've grown to and enjoy that. And I've worked quite a lot on the SSIS, and really trying to get that updated. There is some increased funding in this for that, and I thank you for working on that. And in the recent days, we've been shown also that the transparency is really important. And we've expanded this education bill quite a lot. And while I think many of the provisions are good in it, I would make a motion to not adopt the conference report, and I ask for a roll call.
Representative Nelson moves to refuse to adopt the conference committee report, requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. On the motion to refuse to adopt, Representative Nelson.
I thank you for that, and I ask for a green vote.
Discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's voting remotely?
Carol.
Carol, no.
Carol, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. We are on the motion to concur. Any further discussion in the adoption? I'm sorry, I keep saying motion to concur when it's actually the motion to adopt the conference committee report. The member from Sherburne, Representative Lawrence.
Madam Chair, good afternoon. Madam Speaker, good afternoon. Members, I've shared many times, about 23 days in, but I feel real honored today because although these two committees got to combine a lot of the the results, I got to sit on both of them. And so what a neat experience for me to be able to learn on both sides, not only education and finance, but also children and families. And I feel very, very grateful to have that opportunity. And although I just got an insight, because I think total I got to attend 5 conference committees. So it wasn't a lot, but it gave me a little bit of insight on the workings of how our committees operate, the process that they go through, and the information, the challenges that we have, as well as the testimony that we got to hear. So thank you for that opportunity, and I'm grateful that I was assigned to both committees and now I'll be able to stand here and speak on behalf of the body and address some of the things that I see and that I observe. And I shared this in our Educational and Finance Committee when I had a chance to speak on one of the subjects. And I'm just going to share a couple things that I know. And I think most everyone in this room is going to agree with the first part of my comments. Maybe not all the comments, but maybe the first part of it. But this is one thing that I do know. I know that we've got great teachers. And in education and finance, teachers are talked about a lot. A lot come in to testify, but we've got great teachers in the state of Minnesota. We had superintendents come. We got some excellent superintendents that manage our school districts and take care of our school districts out there. We have dedicated school board members. And I mean that seriously. We've got school board members that are concerned about their districts. They're intentional when they're dealing with their finances, with their setting policies for their districts, when they're dealing with concerns from parents and residents in their district. We have some extremely dedicated school board members in the state of Minnesota. And then we've got committed parents. And I speak on behalf of parents today, especially because they have families, which is part of the bill that we get to discuss today. They got children that they're raising. They're involved in a community, and they get to be involved in the educational system. And they're committed to not only striving for the best of their children that are learning, that are part of the educational system, but in doing so, they commit to the whole process as well, and the benefit of not only their children, but children's friends. They commit by attending sporting events, sponsoring, helping out with different activities that are going on. Some get a chance to volunteer in classrooms as well. And so to understand that we've got great teachers, we've got excellent superintendents, we've got dedicated school board members, and we have committed parents, all dedicated to the betterment of our children in our state, in our educational system as well. A couple things that I can speak from experience and from my district as well is that local involvement are extremely important. And that's why I mentioned those 4 groups of people, because they are on the local level. They're the ones that deal with the repercussions of what happens here in St. Paul, the decisions we make, the financing that we provide, the policy that we set, that they have to implement, deal with, figure out how to make it work. Those 4 individuals, those 4 groups of people. But there's no question that I heard more than once, and even from my own district I speak, is local control is essential. Mandates, and I'm not going to put a number on it, and many numbers have been talked about the number of mandates that were passed or have been passed, but mandates in and of themselves, although they might have a good fundamental goal or direction, they remove local innovation. And that's one thing that concerns me, is mandates take away the innovation of those 4 groups of people who know the students, who know the community, who know the educational system that's working within their school walls, within their area. In addition to that, and this I think we all hear a lot about, and I know was brought in testimony, is unfunded mandates hurt our educational system. And I don't think there's one district in here that we represent that wouldn't agree with that, is the unfunded mandates are a challenge to our educational system. It stresses the budgets. They have to rebudget, figure out where the money's going to come from. Many times it results in cutting local programs and possibly staff, which do not benefit our students.
Representative Lawrence, if you can relate your comments to the adoption of the conference committee report. Representative Lawrence.
I will. Madam Speaker, thank you. Thank you. So I needed to preface so you knew where I was coming from. In the conference report, although there's a lot of dollars that are talked about in that conference report, and even some dollars do go directly to our district, and they wind up going direct, and it was testified directly to the district, I believe it falls short. As far as the conference committee, I think it really falls short. A lot of those dollars wind up in creating some new government I'm going to say bureaucracies, or different government programs that the money does not get down there. It winds up in a lot of nonprofits, which as a new member, I found surprising, is that the number of nonprofits that receive direct dollars, that it doesn't get to the individuals, doesn't get to our school districts, doesn't get to the parents, doesn't get to the teachers, doesn't get to the school board members, doesn't get to the superintendents, and is used for good. And so it's one of those things that our schools need to have that funding. And so as you look at these bills, as we look at some of the things that was married together within the children and families and into the educational finance bills, I think it does fall short on those factors. Is one, the money getting down to the local control where there's innovation, where there's people that are dedicated on that level, as well as the mandates that are challenging them to try to implement on the time level. And so I am not going to vote in favor of the of adopting it as is. I'm grateful for the experience I had over the last few days to be a part of those two committees, and I look forward to continue to be a partner and able to serve. But at this point in time, I would encourage a no vote as far as we move ahead. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I said this before when this bill came up before, but thank you for the work on it. Appreciate it, working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And just like when I spoke earlier this week on the education policy bill, same thing goes. There are good elements in this bill, but I would like to ask members to vote against moving this forward, send it back to committee, and if I could say so, just for the factor of what it does not do for one of the largest crisis issues in our state. And I talked about this on Monday, but I'm going to talk about it again because it is huge, and it's the crisis in the ability of our students to be able to read in this state. We have less than half of our kids who are able to read. We have funding for the READ Act in this bill, but it seems to keep dwindling away because it sure started a lot higher at the beginning of session, and now we're down to a little over $31 million, with $1 million of that, by the way, being taken out from what should go to our classrooms and our schools to train teachers, to purchase curriculum and all the needs that are there to get the science of reading into our schools and into reading programs, takes $1 million of that small 31 million and puts it to, I need to find the spot here, a culturally and linguistically responsive review and assessment of reading materials. Now that sounds really good on the surface, but I'll tell you what that is. That review is a grenade that is going to gut this READ Act. It's going to gut the innovation that we can hopefully send to our schools to get the science of reading in our schools. Because what's going to happen is we're going to take perfectly well-written curriculum that's been proven to work, science of reading, all the things that should be in it, and we're going to have a review committee that says, there are too many white authors, too many white illustrators. If something's overtly racist, of course it shouldn't be in there, but I would about guarantee that that's not in any of the curriculums that are currently an option for our schools. So members, just that portion is going to destroy the effort that we're making as a legislature to make sure that our kids, every one of them, has the opportunity to read. Priorities matter. In this bill, we're diverting funds that should go to the crisis of half of our students not being able to read and sends it to over $500,000 to develop health standards that we don't need. Our local schools and school boards are quite capable of handling that on their own, thank you. We found $50 million for the governor's VPK expansion, voluntary pre-K, for those who don't know what that stands for. So we're going to funnel kids into our schools when our programs are currently not teaching them to read adequately, when we need to focus on getting those programs and that instruction corrected so that our students can learn to read. The READ Act is underfunded and it's overregulated. Last year, we sent 65 torpedoes in the form of mandates to our schools. They're swimming under those mandates, trying to figure out how to get those enacted when they should be focused on reading and reading and reading. On Monday, I repeated a quote that says, "Readers are leaders." I'm going to also say that reading, the ability to read, is opportunity. We talked a lot about rights just previously on the bill we were on. Well, I'd say it's a right of every student in the state to have the opportunity to read well. Right now, only half of our students are able to do that. I want all of our students to have the opportunity to be a leader in this state one day, not just half of them. That's not fair and that's not right. All kids deserve to read well. All kids deserve that opportunity. All kids deserve the opportunity to be a leader in the state, to sit in one of these desks one day. Well, you know what? If we can't read bills, if we can't read and understand, we can't be legislators. Well, neither can our children. Madam Speaker and members, I would like to see this sent back to committee, focus funding on the priority that really matters, and that's getting our kids to read. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to begin by thanking Chair Joachim and Vice Chair Clardy and the staff that's in the back in the alcoves. So fantastic work from the staff back there. And we had robust and at times heated debates during the Education Finance Committee, but I think for the most part, we were centered on what was going to be best for kids. Different perspective oftentimes, but good discussions. I think there are some good provisions that are going to benefit our schools within this bill. The funding, although it's underfunded, but the funding for the READ Act is going to be able to be used to get our teachers paid. So I think that's a positive piece. The pilot for student teachers, I think that is something that we need to continue to dialogue. So I think this pilot is a healthy way to address the workforce issues within education. And then I would be remiss if I didn't thank Rep. Keeler for her work on the attendance pilot, and I look forward to that work to be able to address the attendance and truancy crisis that we have across Minnesota. It's not just a metro issue, it is a statewide issue, and we really need to dig in and address and find good solutions to address the issue, not just try to solve a problem, but really study it and figure it out. So thank you to Rep. Keeler for that. I think if I had to sum up a theme within this bill, and the reason I'll be voting no, unfortunately, is we're continuing with more mandates, although there's not 65 in this bill, thankfully, but we're continuing in this body to tell local school districts how to run their districts. And that's just that's not wise in my opinion. And then we're continuing to grow bureaucracy and not allow that local innovation to really take off. When I was, after session was done, and if I would talk with different groups, over and over and over what I heard, it had to do with mandates. We need mandate relief. We didn't do that in the policy or the finance bill. And then the other thing I heard is we need funding and flexibility. Over and over and over again. We need funding and flexibility. Well, unfortunately, what we've done in this bill is, yes, we've addressed partially the READ Act, but we took $1 million of the $31 million allocation, and we are giving it to a third party to review culturally and linguistically appropriate materials. Now, we should do that, but our school districts have processes in place to be able to do that. We don't need a third party to come in and tell us how to do that. That is more money to grow government, more money out of the classroom that will not allow us to implement the READ Act with fidelity. The statewide health standards, we're going to use about $627,000. Now that seems like a little bit of money, but we're going to use that to do rulemaking to come up with standards. Again, decisions furthest away from the people that are actually doing it, and then we're giving more money to the department, we're growing the department, and we're not funding schools. The Promise Fellows, they do great work, but when our local school districts are cutting budgets, we should not be giving money, any money, to nonprofit groups. We're done. We look at the growth of the Minnesota Department of Ed, the Department of Children and Families, the Department of Human Services. Last year, it was my understanding that when we created this new agency, that we would be eliminating positions in one agency because they're going to be doing work in the other agency. And the way that I read the bill is that we are backfilling all those positions from one agency when we stood up the Department of Children and Families. That would be like if I had a shared position between the middle school and the high school, that when that position shifts over to the high school, and I no longer have the need for that at the middle school, I just fill that position because we've always done that before. That makes no sense at all. That's $14 million. $14 million. And I think this is the smallest amount, but this is the one that just has me shaking my head. I literally, it makes absolutely no sense. So we are going to have a school state librarian. A school state librarian. I'm going to be honest, I don't have a librarian in my own building. But we're going to have a statewide position at the department, and then the aid, and this is the part that really is infuriating to me. The aid for each school district or charter school under subdivision 1 must be reduced proportionately. So we are cutting money. We are cutting money going to local school districts so we can add a position at the Department of Education. Think about that. Cutting money, going out to districts because we got to add another position to the department. And let's not forget, early in session, the department came in and testified, "God, we're still staffing up from last year." Maybe what we should have done, if this was so important, is just say, agency, you absorb that money. We've heard that a lot. So this is misplaced priorities. Misplaced priorities. We are taking money from districts that's already out the door and allocated. And we're going to grow government. A number of us have been meeting with our districts, and one of the pieces of feedback that we heard over and over again is, "God, I just don't know what happened last year. We had such good intentions. We just don't know what happened." You didn't listen. That's what it is. You did not listen to schools. I've said it over and over and over again on this floor. We do not have a clue how to manage local districts. Let's stop. Have some humility. And when you go back to your districts, if you vote for this bill, you are voting to grow bureaucracy. So I hope that people don't say, Well, I just didn't, we had such good intentions. Vote no.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Madam Speaker and members, I was looking at this bill, and we have two huge bills put together in this omnibus. And while I was not on the education, I was on children and families. But I look back to see what the reading scores were like when I would have had a third grader for my second born child. So I went back to 2006 and I just did a little history. Do you know what the reading scores were for Minnesota in 2006, just 17 years ago? I was surprised because I hear less than 50 right now all the time. So I wanted to know, because it's been a while. Even though I grew up with a middle school principal and educators my entire life, I thought, what was it like now that I've been away from school in those grades? 80% of our kids could read in 2006 in the state of Minnesota. And they were also proficient in math, and that's not according to Representative Zalesnikar, that's NPR News. 2006, in just 17 years, we are no longer a North Star state when we have 50% of our kids that are proficient. Let's be clear, if you can't read, you're at a huge disadvantage. If you can't read, you have a very limited pathway for any accelerated earnings that are going to come from higher education. Because opportunities aren't going to happen when you can't read. If you can't read, you can't follow the basic checklist that's going to be at any entry-level job. And let's be clear, if you can't read, every book is banned. Every single book in the library, even though we just funded a new State Department for librarians, it's really irrelevant because if a child can't read, the books are sitting on the shelf. Nobody's checking them out, but maybe the librarian, because they can't read, to enjoy the books. The reality is, where we spend the most money in education is not following where we're having great outcomes. And we know that because we have data to show us that. We've had a 32.6% decline in the ability to read at grade level in 17 years is no Minnesota miracle. And when I look at what's really disappointing to me is our governor is a teacher, and we are not seeing our scores improved. We had the opportunity, you're right, we had a historic surplus to make choices on how we're going to make sure we had local outcomes change. And it's not changing for local communities. It's not supporting teachers as educators in their communities, and the data shows it pretty clearly. On top of education, I'm really disappointed on the children and family because the reality is Greater Minnesota has always ran on family child care, and I've screamed and hollered that we have 50% of closures in family child care, and we have nothing in this bill that's going to have any substantial impact for family child care. When you travel to Ely, Minnesota, and you go to Grand Marais, and you go to these other communities, you're not going to see centers. We don't have the population. We have always depended on Greater Minnesota having family child care. And what do we have? Government just doing 100 more pages of regulations. Like, let's test the soil. That's a great idea for the backyard before you can play. That's what's in these family child care provisions. It's ridiculous. And I'm getting bombarded by it, and they're like, will somebody please stand up and say this is ridiculous? And it is ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. And we can't have jobs if we don't have family child care. And I'm also on the workforce committee. So for that reason, I cannot support this bill in that, and would ask to send it back, because things that really matter to Minnesota are education and being able to read and having family child care. And it's not in there. And the reality is local control lost. We didn't send the money to the classrooms. We grew the Minnesota Department of Education by 23%, and educators were told we had historic investment. And we did, to the state of Minnesota down in St. Paul. That's where historic came, to the state of Minnesota. Where funding is not adequate back in the classrooms, and we're seeing it, because now we have historic cuts at districts across the state. Just pull your local newspapers. And when you're not here soon, you're gonna have people calling you, because my districts are calling me. Because we chose to fund at 4% and 2%, and we could have funded at 5% and 5%, and we didn't do it. And now we got exactly about the same amount of money gap that we could have gave them in district cuts across the state of Minnesota. So we have great educators, been around in my entire life. It's not the educators' problem, it's not their fault. We should be funding our classrooms, we should be funding our child cares back in our local community, and we chose to grow government at the Minnesota Department of Education down here in St. Paul by 23%, and we chose to add a brand new department, Children and Families, for millions. Like I think 23 million in 2023 and 9 million in 2024. So you're right, we had the money. But the other side of the aisle made different choices, and we're gonna live with the repercussions. And members, for that reason, I will not support and urge you to not support and to send this back. Thank you.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I'm just going to speak briefly to the children and families portion of the bill. And first of all, take the opportunity that I missed when we debated that omnibus on the floor to just thank Chair Pinto, Vice Chair Keeler, all of our legislative staff, and in particular Lee Daniels on our side, who due to health concerns was unable to stay in the fight all the way to the end. But we had some vigorous conversations over the course of this term and certainly over the course of this year. And I don't want to completely relitigate everything that was discussed. The debate has been had, but I will just summarize what the minority's concerns are with the children and families portion of this bill. And that is misplaced priorities. It occurs to me that the primary beneficiaries of the children and families portion of this bill are going to be folks who work in and around this Capitol complex. It's the growth of state agencies, standing up an entire new department, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, spending all our money on that, not addressing the technical issues that we have with a system that goes back to the 90s that counties depend upon in order to provide services to end users, to families. And, frankly, not delivering on the big promises that were made prior to this session. Again, I defer to the wonderful sales pitch, and it was a wonderful sales pitch that was offered for capping child care expenses in households at 7% of household income. Sell me a Ferrari, right? I mean, you give me the features and benefits of the product. If the price is zero, then I'll probably take it, but that's not the cost. And in fact, the cost proved to be so exorbitant that it is not included in this bill. And frankly, I think given the fiscal challenges that we know are coming in this state, we've been warned about it, I doubt that we're going to be able to deliver on that promise anytime soon. And so I'll be voting no on this motion to adopt and voting no once again on the underlying bill. This is not the direction that we ought to be going in order to provide for the needs of children and families, much to my regret, but I do appreciate the committee experience. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. I appreciate the motion Representative Nelson made to send this back to the conference committee. And this is something that, going into this session, especially being a first-term legislator, having that $19 billion surplus and knowing the trouble that our schools were in, even though being in the minority, I really thought, well, good, we're finally going to fund our schools. We're finally going to fix the problems that we hear over and over, that we need to fully fund the schools. $19 billion surplus $19 billion surplus, and Minnesota knows it. It is just such a political scam what they did to our schools in what they said is record amount of funding to our schools, $2.2 billion in 2023. And you saw the papers, the Minnesota media just fell in line with those headlines and tried to give all those kudos to Governor Walz and to the majority party. Record funding to our Minnesota schools, $2.2 billion, and that is true. That did happen, record funding. So how, 1 year later, are our schools in such a terrible situation? And members, this is not an opinion. This is not an opinion. This is a fact across the board. School district after school district after school district that is looking for cutting teachers. They're going to be bringing up referendums. They're going back to the local taxpayers. So Minnesota, this was completely misplaced priorities by the majority party, by the education committee, and it truly is a farce. And Minnesotans know this. They cannot claim we cannot fix 20 years of underfunding education in one session. Well, yes, you absolutely could have. You absolutely could have with a $19 billion surplus. And guess what? Minnesotans do not believe you, majority party. Not only that, but the last time I spoke on this floor about education, I got a text from a school board member who thanked me for fighting for schools. And guess what? He campaigned against me in 2022. I also got a message this week from teachers who are Democrats who said, we need to talk to you. We are unable to teach in our schools. The discipline problem is out of control. Superintendents who are calling me, who are saying that they're looking at the 1 and 2 year outlook. It's bleak, Minnesota. It's really bleak for our schools. And it's going to come back to the local government. It's going to come back to our taxes. We could fix this, but instead in 2023, with the trifecta, with the majority party having all parts of the Minnesota government, they chose their woke agenda. They chose their members' priorities and bills that they had on shelves for years and years and years, and they forced them through the state legislation, 65 new mandates, forced on our schools. This wasn't about funding schools. This was about a woke agenda with no guardrails, no balance, no accountability. It was really, I mean, it was amazing to watch, but it was disgusting. So it's unfortunate that our schools are paying for this, and they will be for years. But the one thing that I see is finally Minnesotans are waking up. They're waking up to the agenda, to the radical woke agenda that's being forced on our kids in our schools. They're waking up that this is not a Minnesota First agenda. This is not about teaching our children. We spend more money per student now than we ever have, with lower results, with dismal results. With the READ Act coming out, I also had a text message from someone in my district, a school board member, that said they are going to have to, their children are going to have 9 less in-school days next year because of how this program was set up for the READ Act, that the teachers are going to be getting trained. 9 less days. So when our students are not able to read, how this was set up is our students are going to be in school less because the funding is not there. It didn't have to be this way, folks. $19 billion surplus, $19 billion surplus that was granted to the majority party at the beginning of the 2023 session. They could have done anything that they wanted to do with that. Anything. They could have fixed our schools' problems. And it's quite clear to Minnesota that their priorities were not for schools, not for public education. Members, send this back to the conference committee and let's send a clear message to Minnesota that we do care about education, our school boards, our superintendents, our local governments, and most importantly, our kids, our students, who deserve so much better than what they're getting here in Minnesota from this administration, the trifecta. Send this back to the conference committee.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I am looking forward to passing this adoption of this. Chair Yukim, you have been so passionate about one of my passionate issues, EMS. And the thing about your program that you're talking about today is great because it actually goes to greater Minnesota. And we need this. These are low-hanging fruit. We get in our high schools with EMT programs, and we get great amount of graduates. So thank you for that, and thank you real quickly for, we found out this year that the AEDs in schools don't have policies. Fire extinguishers have policies, but there's no policy in the schools, and we got that in the bill too. It's optional for school districts to do it, but thank you for that. So as we push forward on EMS, please vote for the bill.
I recognize the member from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Members, I am rising to ask us to refuse to adopt the conference committee report. I am particularly troubled with a provision in the bill that is on lines starting on lines 218.23, exemptions from immunizations. Members, this is a very discriminatory policy. It allows for a child care center and a family child care provider to adopt a policy prohibiting a child over 2 months of age from enrolling or remaining enrolled in the child care center or family child care program. It strikes out our current exemptions that passed with bipartisan support years ago. Exemptions from Minnesota. So it strikes out if a person is at least 7 years old and has not been immunized against pertussis, the person must not be required to be immunized against pertussis. It crosses off if, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong, those are allowed. It crosses off. This is the one it crosses. It eliminates completely if a notarized statement signed by a minor's child, parent, or guardian, or by the emancipated person is submitted to the administrator or the other person having general control and supervision of the school or child care facility, stating that the person has not been immunized as prescribed in subdivision 1 because of the conscientiously held beliefs of the parent or guardian of the minor child or of the emancipated person. The immunization specified in the statement shall not be required. Under this bill, totally eliminates the conscientious objection, but it does leave the medical exemption. So if you have a signed statement from a physician, you'd be okay. However, something lies wrong with that one, because very, very, very few physicians will ever write a statement for a parent for medical reasons. And you know why that is? Do you know why that is? Because they are not allowed to. Because quote unquote vaccine injuries do not exist. That's what Big Pharma tells us. That's what Democrats tell us. That's what the media tells us or has been telling us until recently. Members, this is extremely disturbing. It's disgusting. It makes me upset. conscientiously held objections to a pharmaceutical product in order to attend childcare, you're saying that childcare provider can now discriminate against that family for a conscientiously held belief, which is guaranteed under our First Amendment. This is an anti-woman provision. How many women right now are looking for childcare? Coercion is not consent. It is anti-choice. This provision also only had one hearing on March 19th in the House, and it was placed on the General Register on March 25th. It had one hearing February 15th in the Senate and then was laid over. And then, magically, it shows up in a conference committee report. Don't you just love that? Don't you love when things are done in the dark of night around here, behind closed doors, without opposing viewpoints? Just locking up the conference committee reports behind closed doors, and then magically there's the conference committee report. It's there. We're ready. We're ready to have our fake conference committee meeting, and then we're going to bring it to the floor. Members, this alone is extremely troubling. It's absolutely terrible. In 1986, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program was created under President Reagan. And do you know why that compensation program was created? It was because the pharmaceuticals, at that time the vaccines, were creating so many injuries that it went to the pharmaceutical companies went to the government because they were going broke. And so this entire program was set up as a no-fault alternative to the traditional legal system. It doesn't work. It needs to be repealed because pharma is held not liable for any vaccine injury. And how do we know vaccine injuries are real? Well, I believe mothers, okay? Infants and toddlers are unable to communicate when something is wrong, when something hurts them. Parents know. I trust moms. I trust dads. There is a 75-cent excise tax on each dose of childhood vaccines. That 75 cents goes into the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. Now, currently, the COVID vaccine is not on the schedule. So currently, in Minnesota, a provider would not be able to discriminate against a family for their child not being vaccinated against the COVID vaccine. But also, hardly anyone in this country is being vaccinated against COVID anymore. And in the news, most recently, Chris Cuomo of CNN did a whole news show on vaccine injury from the COVID vaccines. He himself was injured from the COVID vaccine. I know that there's a member or two, maybe 3 or 4, that have children who are allergic to vaccines. But apparently, based on this vote, you may be okay with saying, I don't care about your child. Because I only care about my child. It's wrong. It's discrimination. 40% of all FDA-approved pharmaceuticals are recalled according to the U.S. Department of Health, except vaccines. And due to our own policies in this state bribing families under COVID We have children in this state and in this country that are suffering from myocarditis, and there is zero government help for them. The pharmaceutical companies are not held liable for those injuries. So members, I ask you to not adopt the conference committee report.
The member from, we'll move to the member from Hennepin, Representative Edelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm going to ask you to vote yes on this adopting of the committee report. And, you know, as I was hearing what people were saying, bleak, woke agenda, I was like, wait, is this the same? You guys got the same bill? I'm not sure. Seems a little confusing over here because I don't think funding our schools is bleak or woke. It's really honestly sad when I think about how we talk about education and what we have done. There's hardly any mandates in this bill before you. It's actually a great bill. And what it does, Representative Bakeberg, you said flexibility and finding flexibility. And Representative Bakeberg, I just have to say, I really like you. You're awesome. You really are. I'm really happy to serve on the committee with you. But we listened. We found flexibility. Exactly the spreadsheet that I know that you all have before you. I'm pretty sure your districts want this money. The READ Act money is going directly to districts. I know that there's been some not nice things said about the READ Act, but I'll tell you, it wasn't me, myself, that wrote this bill. It was in conjunction, in collaboration with superintendents from some of your schools, actually, with principals, with teachers. Jeff Brand, actually, Representative Brand, Mankato, is doing a really good job. Anoka Hennepin, Representative West, is doing a really good job. They are leading the way. They are asking for this money and they're asking for this change. Last year, we were looking at two different ideas in how we teach literacy in our schools. One was that kids just naturally learn how to read. And yes, you could look at scores from 10 years ago and say, well, kids were learning how to read, but they were basing those scores off of the MCAs. And the MCAs are actually a really poor indicator of how students are reading. They just are. Representative Bakeberg, are they? I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with me. Yep, they are. They are. Because overwhelmingly, anybody in education knows that you're also getting those MCAs at the end of the school year. You're not adopting changes and interventions with the MCAs. You're actually going to do that with FastBridge. You're doing that with Dibble, which you know who brought that to you? This woke Democrat over here, right? And so I think we should stop name calling and say this was a collaboration. I'm pretty sure our teachers and the superintendents that worked on the READ Act are not woke. They were not thinking of bleak agenda. And really, this is injecting hope into our schools. It is all of us working together, Democrats and Republicans, to say that we care about literacy. And also, I just want to say that culturally responsive, having a consultant work on making sure that our materials are reflective of our diverse state, there's nothing wrong with that. You know what that is? As a therapist, I can tell you, it's actually really good for kids to see themselves reflected in the materials they read. It helps with our kids right now having a mental health crisis to say, hey, you know what, that kid looks just like me and that kid's doing okay. So I just want to thank you, Chair Joachim, for investing in our schools, for being courageous, and for not actually providing a lot of mandates, for listening and providing flexibility, and that's what we have in this bill. I know all of the districts all throughout the state, contrary to what you're hearing right now on the floor from the other side, are going to be very happy with this bill. Thank you.
The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And as I've been sitting here the last days, it strikes me that as I near my retirement, that a lot of the things that I've been saying over the years, people aren't going to pay much attention to anymore. And the speeches that I give, that I practice, only my dog Buster will pay attention anymore after I leave here. And so I do want to repeat some things that I've said in the past. It's kind of like Erdahl Golden Oldies. And this one repeating a mantra that I've had about education, about teachers. We need to pay our teachers better. We had a chance in the last session. There was, I think, money to put more than we did on salaries. Certainly doing something about their pensions, which are the worst, if not close to the worst, in the country. I talked over the years about more support for teachers. I emphasized mentoring, and we did create a program for mentoring in the state of Minnesota. Talked about preparing our teachers better. I once had a conversation with Pasi Salzberg, the architect of the Finnish education system, which is considered the greatest education system in the world. And I said to him, so to what do you credit your success? And he said, teachers, teachers, teachers. All of them have to have a master's degree in their content area, and that's something that I did manage to get through. And all of them have 1 year long paid student teaching. And that's what I'm getting to today that I do appreciate is in this bill. Representative Norris and I both had bills dealing with providing some type of compensation for our student teachers. And a pilot program is included in this, and I think that's a positive thing. So once again, as we look to the future, let us continue to attempt to pay teachers better, to support them better, and to prepare them better. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is a good time to talk a little bit more about hearing from teachers, hearing from parents. I recently sent out a survey to my school districts, which I share with several of you across the aisle. And I got 500 responses back. And some of those responses were, give schools more autonomy to use the dollars effectively instead of constraining us. Have less rules around how we spend the money. Legislators need to spend time in buildings talking with teachers, paras, and administrators. More funding for schools to add teachers to reduce class sizes, which I will give a personal example of that here shortly. Ask us. These are from teachers that are teaching our kids. They're teaching my kids. Fund all the mandates. You should meet with us, listen to us, involve us in your decisions. Spend a day or a week shadowing a teacher. Seems like a novel concept. I had a bill for that. Probably should have looked at it. One thing I do want to say is, Chair Pinto, thank you for including some of the funding for food insecurity. I do appreciate that. It's something important to me. But I think these survey results, I think what we're seeing is that there is some consistency that we're not listening, we're not learning. I'm going to take my legislative hat off and talk to you as a parent of my kindergarten Laurel, my fourth grader Fiona. And, we just got news this past week of how we're going to have to be letting teachers go. And so now my kids are going to be stuck in a classroom with 35 plus students, if not more. And when I speak to the superintendents, and again, these are superintendents that we share, they say this is the tip of the iceberg. And why is that? Because we're not listening. However much I like the money that's in these, the READ Act, and I'm thankful for it. One of my schools, $400,000, another one of my schools, $450,000, which is a lot of money. But you know what? I wish this was the printout from last year that didn't have the mandates that would have given one of my schools $5.2 million more dollars, another one that would have gotten $7.7 million more dollars. They could have hired more teachers, could have kept class sizes smaller. We could have had a real impact in our education system. Well, we did last year, and it was not good. I'm asking members, some of you are parents, some of you are teachers. Let's support our kids, let's support our schools, and I would vote no on this.
The member from Cass, Representative Knudsen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just wanted to touch on, well, thank you, colleagues, for highlighting some very good reasons to not adopt this conference committee report. I just want to touch on a couple things, and with an overlying theme of taking control away from parents and school boards and the people closest to the children that we're supposedly trying to help through this bill. The state health standards, that one really bothers me, because what the needs are in Minneapolis for the students in Minneapolis are different than what the children from Nevis, Minnesota and LaPorte, Minnesota need. Those school boards, those parents, they know what their children need best. They are the closest to their children. Why are we saying that, no, you don't know, and now we're going to control this? We're going to micromanage everything you teach your children. No, they know best. And then that leads me right into it. I'm not on children and families, but this is a huge concern for me as well. Allowing child care centers the ability to discriminate against parents that choose to not vaccinate at all or to delay vaccinations. That is horrible. And then another personal story, but when I had my twins, they were born at 37 weeks. One of them was born not breathing. He was quickly revitalized. He came back and everything was fine, but that was terrifying for me. And shortly after that, they came in and they said, okay, they're ready for their first Hep B vaccination. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. An hour ago, this little boy was not breathing. Let's give him a little bit of time and let's just hold off for a little bit. I wasn't at that time aware of how I felt about vaccines. I wasn't doing it because I don't believe in vaccines. My whole family is in the medical field. Everybody, my mom's a nurse, my dad's a nurse, my sister's a nurse. So I'm not opposed to vaccinations. I just thought that might have been a little early for my son, who wasn't breathing an hour ago. So I asked to delay that. My husband and I talked, and we just thought, you know what, let's wait. Let's wait on this, and let's just do some research, and let's just take it slower than what they're trying to do right now. Great. So they said, okay, well, maybe before he leaves the hospital then, we'll do this. And I was like, okay, well, we'll talk about it again later. When we were leaving the hospital, I still was like, something doesn't feel right. No, we're gonna wait. We got home and I started doing research, and I did a lot of research. And the more research I did, the more concerned I got, just because of the unknowns. When we were vaccinated, when I was vaccinated, there were like a fraction of the vaccinations that are recommended for our children right now. I'm sure most people in this chamber went through chickenpox, and we came out just fine, you know, a few days off of school and whatever. But my point is, we cannot mandate that parents can't get child care for their kids and be discriminated against because they have an opposition to this, because they don't want to vaccinate their child for every single vaccine that's recommended in the state of Minnesota. That's ridiculous. We already have a child care shortage in our state. And now to add this on, I'm not alone. There are many people like me that have chosen to delay or just not vaccinate at all. That's my right as a parent. I did that because I felt that was best for us. And like I said, I am not opposed to people that do want to vaccinate. Actually, this morning when we recessed, I was on a phone call with our family doctor, with my son, who was at the doctor's office, and we actually talked about vaccinations again today. Because now that they're older, maybe we will entertain doing 1 or 2 or 3 or however many we feel is right, but that's our decision. That shouldn't be mandated by anybody, and we most definitely shouldn't be denied childcare because we choose not to vaccinate our children. So for a lot of other reasons that I could talk about, I hope that we send this back to conference committee so we can iron some of these things out. Taking control away from parents and the people that know their children best, the people closest to those children, is the wrong direction, Minnesota. Send this back to conference committee and let's do it better. Thank you.
The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, I believe that we need to vote no on this adoption of the conference committee report. Granted, there's a few good things in this bill for our schools, but there's too many misplaced priorities. While our schools are struggling from all the 65 mandates from last year, granted, we supposedly gave them a historic amount of money, but between the 65 plus mandates and the things in the labor bill that was passed last year, one of my schools received $6 million more, but that didn't cover the $12 million in new costs. Our schools, especially in greater Minnesota, are on the verge of collapse. Now we have a few more mandates again. Granted, we have more money for the READ Act, but most of those small schools in greater Minnesota, they're unable to use the READ Act money that we give them because of the restrictions on it, so it doesn't do any good. They get the money, it just sits there. They can't touch it. Just like the school lunch accounts, once the money's in there, it cannot be touched, except for the lunch program. Now we're taking money out of the classrooms again. And not only out of the classrooms, out of the teacher's pocket. Because we're taking money that we gave them last year to give up an office space and somebody to sit here in St. Paul. Taking away local control of the schools. You should be ashamed of yourselves. And then to find out this bill violates a law that was just signed this week into law in the Human Rights Bill. Absolutely ridiculous. I should use Representative New Brindley's word, but I won't use that this time. I'll let her use it. This bill reminds me of a meme I saw recently dealing with education. We're getting to be some of the worst educated students around, failing. Less than 50% can read, barely 50% can do math. And it's even worse for science. The meme was, basically, why would we educate our kids? If we educate them, they can overthrow us. We need to educate our kids. Without an education, we hurt them. We've always heard that education will get you out of poverty. but we're not educating our kids, we're indoctrinating them. We need to educate and challenge them to the best of their abilities. But bills like this don't do that. Bills like this, the only thing they do is hurt our kids. Send this back to conference committee.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Hicks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes for this bill. There are some amazing things in here for people with disabilities that I don't usually get to talk about outside of the Human Services bill. There's protections in here for parents with disabilities to make sure that they are not disproportionately affected because of their disability in child welfare. There's money in here for kinship in child welfare to ensure that kids who are placed with family during a child welfare experience have support. It's really hard. There's money in this bill to ensure that our child welfare process is working and to take a look at what might work better and to help us make informed decisions. And there's money in this bill to ensure that children who are immune compromised, who are going through cancer or have allergies or serious medical conditions that may make them need a medical exemption for vaccines can be in a space where they're protected because the other children are vaccinated. This bill is wonderful, and we did some great work in children and families, and Chair Joachim did amazing work in education. And as she stated, we're going to continue this special education work. We have to take a look at the formula, and we have to take a look at a way to create inclusion through that formula. We have to reward schools for inclusion and make it easier to do it so we can have an inclusive community. Inclusion starts when they're this big, and we keep them included into adulthood because we started when they were little. So this bill does that, both in early childhood and in K-12, and I'm so excited and proud of my colleagues who have done all of this work. So I encourage everyone to vote green.
The member from Pine, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm going to rise again and talk about that we really need to fund the SSIS. There is $10 million in there, which is great. I'm thankful for the little bit of increase from when it left the House. We were at about $9 million. With the federal match, that'll be about $20 million to work on this. But if you remember, the estimate came back in of needing somewhere between 80 and 100 million to really overhaul the system and really bring it up to where we need it to be. And, this is a part that when I got here 5 years ago in a special election, I kind of inherited a bill from Senator Rarick. And I drafted, it was drafted, I put my name on it, and I thought, well, I don't really even know what this is. But I've learned a lot about the SSIS system and what our counties are working with, and several of our tribes as well. And it's a piece of, I would call it critical infrastructure that is horribly outdated. And, even Chair Nord the other night when we were talking about this, his comment was, this has been ignored for far too long. And I really believe that with the $10 million we've got, it's a start, it's necessary, but we really need to be funding this at the level we need to replace it at. And I would urge that we look at that and find that dollar, find the funds to be able to do this, because this is something that it is so crucial to our social workers, to our counties, and really all the way down to our children and our families that this is affecting by not funding this fully. What I've been hearing from social workers, somebody will go in, start filling out a report, the computer crashes. Now, that can happen with anything. Probably most of you have written a paper in college and forgot to hit save or something like that. When it's our error, that's one thing, but when it's a system that's failing because of age, and maybe somebody's maybe a social worker is putting in some really detailed notes of what is happening. out of frustration, they try again. Maybe it's the Cliff Notes version this time. Well, then maybe someone else is looking at the case later and says, well, this isn't really that big of a deal. They read through the Cliff Notes. I don't see what the issue is. And so now we've shortchanged that child. You heard that. We've shortchanged that child. We have not given them the care that they need. I think, families are the best place, but there's times that families are in crisis, and maybe there is a time that there has to be some outside intervention. And when we can't have the detail and the reporting that is really crucial to this, we're not failing ourselves. Well, we are failing ourselves, I should say, but we're failing that child, we're failing that family, because we're not investing in the infrastructure around it. And I would really encourage, a no vote on this, and that we send it back and really try to find some funding somewhere to really get this to be where it needs to be. It's going to take some time to build this, but I think we need to dedicate that funding now and get it done so that we're not failing our families and our children in the future. Thank you.
The member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. As I look through these bills, one thing is very clear. Both the education and the children and families portions of this bill increase bureaucracy while continuing to underfund actual needs. That's what both of these do, and I'll talk about just a couple of things. And you know what, actually, before I get into this funding stuff, I'll just say, it's been kind of an interesting discussion about the vaccine side of this when it comes to child care workers. I just want to point out, I just looked up the data, and in Minnesota, for kids up to 24 months, so this is the prime age group we're looking at of kids who need child care. Minnesota, this is vaccine uptake for children up to 24. Among white children, 76.3% of those children are vaccinated. Black children, 48.6% of those children are vaccinated. Hispanic, 67.4% of those children are vaccinated. So let's be very clear. When we're talking about discriminating against families being able to place their children in childcare, this disproportionately impacts Black and brown families. Let's be very clear about that. And the result of that is going to be one of two things: either coercion for these minority families who have chosen not to vaccinate, or discrimination in not allowing them to attend these child care centers. I'm not sure that's really what you intended, but that is absolutely the result of this piece of legislation right here. Frankly, vaccines are not my issue, but freedom is. And not discriminating is, but again, as we've discussed today, more equal for some than others. And in this case, more equal for white families than Black and brown families. So on this budget, and the theme that we see over and over and over again with our Democrat colleagues, we're going to increase bureaucracy, we're going to spend more money for state agencies, and we are going to continue to underfund and neglect actual needs in our communities. This one I love, $627,000 for statewide health standards. That's about 4 times what it usually costs to develop standards, education standards. 4 times. I don't know where we're coming up with these numbers, but that money could be going to kids instead. I love this one too, $130,000 per year in perpetuity. This is going to go into the tails. We now forevermore are going to have a new position at the Department of Education. A new state librarian. I cannot for the life of me even figure out why we would need this. My schools have a librarian. Thankfully, they haven't been forced to cut those yet. But I know they're on the chopping block because Democrats refuse to give our schools the money they need. Instead, they continue to fund the Department of Education or throw mandates at them that they have to pay for instead of choosing to pay for people like librarians and teachers and programs that actually help kids. It's pretty wild. And of course, the additional mandates that, again, cost more money. Especially, I mean, you look at this, paid leave for school closures mandated extended to non-instructional staff and program staff. That is literally a direct cost on schools that we are not giving them additional money for. It's a wonder our schools are coming to us and saying, what is going on? We can't afford this. We're cutting. We are continuing to cut programs because we don't have money. I can't wait to go home and tell them why they don't have money. And frankly, it's because the priorities of the Democrats are pretty screwed up down here. Let's talk about the children and families, because there's a lot of money going on here that is pretty wild. This one is my favorite. $14 million that's going to different departments, but it's out of this budget. $14 million to replace staff. Because if you'll remember correctly, last year when Democrats passed this bill, they literally wrote into law that these departments were not allowed to find efficiency. They were not allowed. In fact, they were forced to keep every single employee, even if it was duplicative. And now they're saying, oh yeah, but now we got to backfill all these things. We started new agencies, and we wrote into law that you couldn't find efficiencies, and what we said was going to happen is already happening. $14 million. And again, this is ongoing funding, folks. These people are not just going to be hired for this biennium, for the remainder of the biennium. This is ongoing funding. And may I remind you, we are already looking at a, quote, structural deficit, otherwise, or structural imbalance, otherwise known as a deficit. This is directly adding to the deficit that we are going to see in our next budget. Directly. Representative Nelson, thank you for being an advocate for the SSIS system. And like you said, this is absolutely critical infrastructure. We have done things in this body that are absolutely going to hurt children and make child welfare more difficult. We are going to make it more difficult to protect children in the state. That's what Democrats are doing right now. And we're doing that while we are ignoring the very system our counties need to do the best they can under really difficult circumstances to take care of these kids. $10 million is laughable. It's a joke. I love this one. $4.5 million to MDE of all people to help manage the summer EBT program. Surely we can come up with a better idea than giving money to EBT to MDE to try to feed kids. Did we not learn our lesson about how well MDE does when it comes to feeding kids? How many people are under indictment right now? How many hundreds of millions of dollars were stolen from our kids? It's fantastic. It's fantastic. I love it. You can't make this stuff up. So while we are creating an Office of Homelessness in the Human Services, under the Department of Human Services, in this bill, we're going to do a pregnant and parent homeless youth study and a transgender adult shelter analysis in the under children and families. It's not even for children. Adult shelter analysis. Like, I don't know how you guys make decisions over there on the other side of the aisle, but it is absurd. It is silliness. And I know there's a little turf war going on about who should handle homelessness. But But good grief, shouldn't we try to actually do it right than feed into this turf war? How about we put an adult shelter analysis with the Office of Homelessness? That might make sense. How about we try to actually bring stuff together and have the left hand know what the right hand is doing instead of this disjointed nonsense? It's just nonsense. MDE is bragging about staffing up because they still haven't even been able to hire the staff that we granted last year, while our schools are laying off teachers and cutting programs. That's what's happening. That is what's happening. We're going to pay for more bureaucracy, more staff to micromanage health mandates across the state, instead of actually funding our schools. How about we fund our schools so that they can have that health teacher that they already need? The absurdity of these bills. The absolute absurdity. I think, honestly, the SSIS system, Representative Nelson, we should have just dumped all of this money into SSIS, do something to actually help our children, and call it a day, because the rest of this bill is a joke. The rest of this bill is an absolute joke. More mandates, more bureaucracy, more spending, no problem solved. Not one. We're not solving a problem. Give me a break. And again, we're already rolling back the READ Act. We're already rolling back the one thing that, frankly, everyone in this chamber agrees is a problem. Although we say we agree it's a problem, and at the same time, Democrats are already rolling it back. They're already making it harder for teachers to implement, for schools to implement the READ Act and teach our kids to read. Because, we'll say it again, every book is banned for a child who cannot read. I'm glad that I see some folks mouthing along with me. Hopefully it's sinking in. Hopefully we're getting it. Because that's the real injustice here. So I hope you feel really good about all the bureaucracy you're spending money on, all the FTEs you're adding to these different departments, all the money you're spending while our schools continue to cut and lay off because of the mandates you imposed on them. You did this to our schools, and now you refuse to fix it. What a shame.
The member from Washington, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've hit on a lot of things as we've been discussing, and I don't want to, beat a dead horse here, but I do want to mention a couple things. I talked earlier when this bill was before us for the passage originally about the fact that there is one mandate in here. Well, there's a couple new mandates in here, but the one on the health standards is something I'm very, very opposed to. And not only opposed because there's another mandate, but opposed because this is pulling local control and pulling parental control, again, from our schools. But it's also going to cause a huge amount of consternation for our teachers and for our administrators, because people have different viewpoints on what should be taught in health, and that's the one thing that I think you have a lot of. You get angry parents with certain issues. There's cultural things. We've seen it. We saw it in St. Louis Park, yep. Thank you. You know, and so it isn't just a rural versus metro thing. It's some cases it's cultural, it's religious, and it's going to provide a lot of problems. And our schools, as we know, have declining enrollment. People are, you know, questioning whether they should be homeschooling their kids, and that's not the school's fault. That's the fault of the policies that are being passed by this legislature. And so we're causing the problems, not our schools, not our teachers, not our administrators. The one other thing I wanted to fill, I'm not on children and family, but I know Representative Pinto, I did offer to help last year on this agency, and that never happened. But I do have had experience in dismantling an agency, in moving things around in state government about 15 years ago, and it could have been done without backfilling positions, and it should have been done without backfilling positions. And I don't know whether that where that came out of, somewhere within the administration, but it's very unnecessary. It's an extra cost, and it's a shame that they couldn't figure it out, change a few job descriptions. They didn't need to you know, to lay anyone off. They just changed some job descriptions and give people options. We did not need to add more to the bureaucracy. And so I know the dollars are in here, but the administration themselves have the ability to manage how they need to. And so maybe if the commissioners are listening for the, you know, the other agencies, maybe they can start thinking about that and actually properly managing state government, especially at a time when we probably have a lot of open positions, I would guess, also within state government. So we can't even hire to fill the ones we have. So it's $14 million, which frankly we could have used for more money for the READ Act or other entities. I'm happy that we have a little more for the READ Act. I'm not happy that we're trying to politicize it by having people look at curriculum, spending a huge amount of money at the Department of Ed, and the fact that we're also expanding the Department of Ed by 23%. That is, again, probably a very, very poor use of taxpayer dollars, which are much more limited this year than they were last year. And I suspect that next year we're going to have even more limited use of resources. So I also encourage the members to vote not to adopt this and to send it back to conference. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on the adoption of House File 5237, all those in favor to adopt the conference committee report on House File 5237 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File number 5237, as amended by conference.
Third reading. The member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't rehash what we just went over. There are a couple provisions that I was reminded of, though, that I wanted to touch on because I heard pretty extensively from constituents about it. The family child care provisions, there's a ton of concerns about this. And specifically, I had a conversation with a family child care provider in my district, and she went on and very appropriately was concerned about some of the things that are going to come out of these provisions. She specifically talked about dirt and dog hair and the cleanliness. Now, of course, we want to have family child care environments that are clean, and I believe they are. And if there are issues in those places, then I think those can be addressed. But she described it as a crisis for family child care providers. And I'm certainly not an expert, so I don't pretend to, Chair Pinto, to understand, but that's what my constituent, the word she used, and significant concerns about what's going to come out of that. The vaccine provision is also very, very concerning. One of my roles as a building principal early in the year, we need to go through and we need to verify if we have the required vaccines in place. And what I've learned over the course of my career is that I could care less if a parent chooses to get a vaccine, because it's a very personal decision about what they do. And I don't get into a debate with parents about whether or not they should have a certain vaccine. I don't understand it. I'm not a medical doctor. But I do believe strongly that parents should have that choice. So when I make that phone call, I usually say something along the lines of, I don't care what you do. That's not the reason for my call. The reason for my call is I either need to get the verification that your child has the vaccine, or I have this conscientious objector form that you need to come in and sign. Either way, it doesn't matter. And it just de-escalates the temperature. And I'm just really concerned about a provision like this, that what is going to do and the long-term implications. I don't see Rep. Edelson over there, but she asked my opinion on MCAs. And I think it is critical that we have expectations. And then we need to measure those expectations. So we can have a lot of feelings about the validity of an assessment, but we need to have a measure. Because if we didn't have a measure, we wouldn't know that we have a crisis about literacy. And we wouldn't be spending, $120 million, I think, over the 2 years is what we're going to spend on the READ Act. Our Republican proposal was $250 million, just as a reminder. But you never use one data point when you're making decisions about kids. It's called data triangulation. So you look at the MCAs as one data point. Then you look at a growth model assessment. We use something called FastBridge. People will use NWA, but that's to measure the students' growth, their individual growth over the course of the year. And then you trust the experts in the classroom. You have to get feedback from your teachers. You look at their grades. So you look at that data to make decisions. So that would be the answer to Rep. Edelson's question about my thoughts about the MCAs and data. And I want to talk about the funding for the READ Act. And I had a superintendent text me and say, any funding is great, Ben. So I am appreciative of the $65,000 that the Jordan district is going to get, the $316,000 that Prior Lake, and about $275 for Shakopee. That's good. That's good information, or that's good data. But also, I know that for this superintendent that reached out, by contract, the teacher training is $40 an hour. That's what they get paid for outside of duty day. For core, which is kind of the middle of intensity and time, it takes about 45 hours to do that training. So about $1,800 per teacher to be trained in the science of reading. Multiply that out. If you have 30 teachers, that's $54,000. Jordan would be covered. But if you have 40 teachers training, that's $72,000. They're not able to cover the cost of that training. So, well, yes, the funding is appreciated. But we need to keep in mind that this is one-time funding. And this is why it's so important that higher ed be engaged and be addressing the science of reading at the higher ed level. Because the teachers that we hire next year, if it's from an institution that frankly is pushing back on the science of reading and have said publicly that they will not do the science of reading at their institution, that cost is going to be shifted to the school district, and then they're going to have to retrain that teacher. And we won't have the $36.06 per pupil next year. So we have to do this, and that is the main concern that I have, that we are not addressing this, and we are pulling back. We're not addressing this fully, and we're pulling back from the science of reading because some people are pushing back. And like I talked about a month or two ago, we have to lean in and get this done right. Thank you. Vote no.
The member from Mower, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and it's good to be able to discuss this together. As I was looking through the conference report, the first thing that's frustrating to me is the fact that we are looking at this bill that has a bill inside of a bill inside of a bill. You know, as a person who really would prefer to have single subject bills, I'm almost on board with the idea that we can have one for ed policy, one for ed fi, but to have ed fi and children and families put together is just a little too stretched for me. So that makes it very difficult to support. I really have loved to see them separately. Understand time crunches, understand all that. It makes the process become less transparent, and I think that's really important for us to maintain integrity of our institution, which is that we look at things as thoroughly as possible and as transparent as possible with as much public input as possible. I'm looking at the runs for and for the schools for the READ Act. And what my colleague said, to remind everyone of a little history of what the minority party had put out, would have put a lot more money, because we're able to focus and prioritize. It's so easy to get ourselves caught up in, look at, we have this giant surplus, and so that means everyone can get everything. Well, when that happens, no one gets anything, and we don't prioritize what actually should be funded. What actually should be funded is that children need to learn how to read. And so we are sent here to St. Paul to make difficult decisions. We are sent here to make those difficult decisions, to say, listen, this isn't our money, this is your money, because the government doesn't make money, they just spend other people's money. And so it is our job to make sure that we are prioritizing and that we are actually making the difficult decisions on where this should be going. And where this should be going is not in all the little tiny things over here. We should be putting much more investment in literacy. And what we had proposed in 23 was a much bigger investment, even with the fix that is the majority party is trying to give to us today. I'm looking at the budget sheet here, and I'm seeing some of the money that was left on the table that the Senate had that just didn't make it through conference, with reading instruction training reimbursement and regional literacy training. All of that was left on the table. That could have been money that went to our teachers, to our classrooms, to actually implement this. This program is incredibly important, and it needs funding to be able to do it. And it's just not enough. It's just not enough. And so I feel, as we're looking at this bill gives more money to government than it does to our teachers, than it does to our classrooms. We're seeing that there's more money for Carrie. We certainly didn't cut the $1 million to make sure that we can that the Carrie can make sure our materials are not culturally destructive. We certainly couldn't cut that and put that towards our schools, but we're also spending $627,000 for statewide health standards, putting a new state librarian position at MDE. And in order to fund that, Minnesota, in order to fund that, they diverted funds from schools to MDE, because funding more bureaucracy is what's going to make our schools better. We've already talked the last time when we looked at the Education Policy Conference Committee how I feel like this is a massive step backwards with the READ Act, and that we have a working group to look at teacher and paraprofessional pay. Can't just put more money, can't just give more money to our schools and let them decide how to do it, which could actually go to teacher salaries as they negotiate that. unlike when we said, hey, look at historic funding, but the school boards couldn't actually use it. If we actually gave more money, unrestricted funds to our schools, they actually could go ahead and put that money on their salaries. They could negotiate for higher salaries. But no, we're going to do more government and just put a working group on it, because working groups have been able to solve all of our problems. And of course, the new state librarian position at MDE. I do want, even though I wasn't on Children and Families, I appreciate the work that the committee did. There were some big promises from this body about what we were going to do for childcare. And frankly, many of those things were very concerning to our family childcare providers. I still have yet to see a proposal, provisions that actually follow the 2019 task force that says, hey, let's actually streamline our licensing procedure, our investigation procedure, all of those things. I haven't seen that. And that when we looked at the results of that 2019 task force, it talked about how overregulation is what is actually causing higher compliance costs and causing family childcare providers to go out of business. And I don't know what, I understand, hey, look, we can have government-controlled childcare, but frankly, more options are going to be the best for people who, especially out in rural Minnesota, it's really important to have that. So with the emphasis on more bureaucracy, with the emphasis on making sure that that we're taking a step backwards on the READ Act, with our inability to prioritize and make the difficult decisions, frankly, last year and this year, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage a red vote. Thank you, members.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to just close out and on this side and just kind of give a high-angle view of what this bill would look like if it had been built by our Republican education team. And I could list, the good components I see in the current bill that's before us and the components I find concerning, but I'd rather just say, if this had been built by our team, this is what it would look like. Number one, it would have funding and flexibility. Our schools need funding that's flexible so that they can meet the priorities set by parents and their local school boards. In this bill that I would envision with my team, we would set measurable goals, and then we get out of the way and let schools go at it. Because parents and our school boards and our local teachers know best how to educate our kids. Secondly, it would focus on literacy. And we address the literacy through the science of reading. We've talked about that a lot. Children have a fundamental right to read. And I'll tell you what, the reading charlatans who have been pushing a reading method onto our schools for many years, I was in there teaching first grade and I saw it come in years ago. Those reading charlatans have not given up. They are still around. And we need to be very careful that they don't get their foot in the door and destroy what has started here. They're still pushing back on the science of reading. They use words like culturally destructive. As a matter of fact, in committee, we heard that the science of reading is culturally destructive. So I certainly hope that those charlatans don't end up on that evaluation team, because it'll destroy any good curriculum that we can put before our kids. Thirdly, local control and parent empowerment is what needs to be in this bill, majorly, because local control is innovation. And empowered parents are engaged parents. Decisions made the furthest from the parent involve the parent the least. And I tell you why local control is innovative. It's every time we mandate something, every one of those 65 mandates from last year and the few that are in this bill this year, they stifle innovation because we're saying, you're going to do it our way, what we as a legislature tell you, instead of freeing up schools who could say, hey, we've found a better way to do this. We found a way to help kids learn even more. We found a way to help get more attendance, better attendance in our schools. And when we start mandating things, we stifle that and we say it's one way, it's our way or the highway as the legislature. We want to empower local control. And lastly, expectations matter, because mediocrity is not equity. We need to close the belief gap, the belief that every child can learn. And we should challenge students through academic rigor rather than burying them in ideology and indoctrination. Because high expectations, I had that drilled into me as a teacher for many years, set high expectations. That's how kids learn. And yet I see us over and over, especially recently, the last couple of years, lowering those expectations and saying, well, you know, they can't reach this, so let's not test this, or let's not do that. Or even with teachers, let's not test this because they can't pass that test. No, we should have high expectations, and then we should help our students and our educators reach those expectations. So I thank you again for the hard work on this bill, but I do recommend a no vote. Thank you.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, members, for the conversation about this Conference Committee report. I'm really grateful to those who've worked with me on children and families issues the past 2 years. It has been sometimes a messy process procedurally, as Representative Mueller was alluding to, and I'm really hopeful that as we get the new agency in place, we'll be in a different position on that as we move forward. On the substance, though, members, we can be really proud of this report. I heard a comment about misplaced priorities, and I guess I would just say, members, let's keep in mind that the children and families portion of this bill makes sure that people are fed. We have funding for food shelves and food banks that is desperately needed around our state. It provides funding to address homelessness, people who are in really dire situations. We have spikes in homelessness that we've been experiencing, and also shelters in a number of our communities at risk of closure. There's funding to address that. And members, the priority of advancing on child protection. What's in the bill that left the House floor, what is coming back in the Conference Committee report, are a series of really needed reforms. Yes, members, there is more needed on this IT system, this SSIS, but my goodness, we are going to be making big strides. Please, please vote in favor of moving forward on that system. And members, I guess, and then the final topic I want to address, because it's been brought up by so many members, relates to childcare and early learning. I need to correct the record. I was a colleague who talked about hearing from family childcares with concerns about regulations and proposals. I want to make sure we're very clear that what you may be hearing from providers is about a set of draft proposals that were released a couple weeks ago. They would not take effect with a legislative action, which would not come until next session at the earliest. So please, members, if we can urge those folks reaching out to us, family childcares, childcare centers, if they have thoughts about regulations, to please provide thoughts about those draft regulations and their draft proposals. It's a draft. That's what it is. There's some good stuff, probably some stuff that doesn't work too. Please provide information about it. In the meantime, the bill that you are about to vote on contains reforms to how the licensing works right now that are being requested by our child care providers to assess the risk that if there's a violation, how kind of dangerous or problematic is it. Let's put a weighting on that, and more dangerous, more challenging violations, we want to weight more and others less. There's funding that is desperately needed by our family child care providers and child care centers to meet licensing requirements, to expand their facilities. They can take on more kids. This facilities funding. And so, members, this is all good stuff in the bill. One final component in the bill that I need to address, because it's been brought up so often, is a provision that allows for business owners to make their own choice about who their customers are, and allows parents, who are those customers, to make their choice about who they go to and receive services from. And this is a provision that allows for the operator of a child care center or family child care to make their own decision about who comes into their home, what family does, who comes into their child care center regarding vaccination. Now, that's very consistent with public health. It is very consistent with freedom. so that a provider gets to decide for themselves as a private sector enterprise. I hear a lot from my colleagues on the other side about that. This allows private sector providers to make their own decision about such a thing and allows parents, especially those whose children are immunocompromised, to make a decision about where they bring their child because they do not have that choice right now. This is removing a government mandate on private enterprise and on parents. Members, that is not a provision to vote against, a reason to vote against the bill. That'd be a reason to vote for it, along with many, many, many others. I'm so grateful for the chance to partner with Chair Joachim and the education team to really turn this into the children bill, the families bill, the helping Minnesotans to thrive bill. All Minnesotans of all kinds of backgrounds, we can be really proud to vote green on this bill, and I certainly hope that we do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, the author of the bill, Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chair Pinto. This does seem to be an absolute natural fit, thinking of our youngest learners to those that are getting ready to launch into the world. And I want to thank members for the conversation. You know what? Our conversation here today gives me a lot of hope because we're all focused on our students. And that's where we should be when we make these policies. And 6 years ago, when I became the Ed Policy Chair, students were the first people I heard from. They came in and we did a whole Student Voices Day. You know what they wanted? They wanted support for mental health. They wanted food security for mostly the ones that came for their fellow students. And they wanted accurate information on health. Well, we're about to get the third one done. We already did the first two, and I'm very proud of that. We built on what we did last year. We built on, we did a huge investment in the formula. We did special education cross-subsidy. We indexed the formula to inflation to provide our schools with stability moving forward. We did universal meals. We did so much, and we just built on that this year with what we did with the READ Act. I want to thank Representative Edelson and Senator McQuaid for all the work they did with all the stakeholders, from parents to teachers to literacy experts to administrators. We provided maximum flexibility for those funds going into those schools. And I hope people really do look at the categories, look at the spreadsheets. We are getting more teachers in our classroom by supporting our student teachers, by doing the special education program to get more teachers into the classroom. And you know what? Kids can't read if they don't have teachers. We also keep more students in our classroom between the work on the task force for attendance, as well as this attendance pilot project that is going to be absolutely incredible. Because more than anything, kids don't learn how to read unless they're in the classroom. So members, I would really encourage you to vote for this efficient and effective bill that will support our earliest learners to those launching into their careers, and I'd ask for a yes vote.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the members voting remotely.
Carroll.
Carroll, aye.
Carroll, aye. Newton.
Aye.
Newton, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 70 ayes and 58 nays, the bill is repassed as amended and its title agreed to.